Konnichiwa, buenos dias, salam alaikum, ni hao, bonjour, namaste, shalom, bulu, magandang hapon, dobreyeni, guten tag, annyeong haseyo, good afternoon. My name is Ping Chong, and I've been directing and creating work for the theater for almost 40 years. I come to theater honestly. My grandfather and father were director librettists, and my mother was a singer in the Chinese opera. My parents came to the United States in the 1930s as members of a Cantonese opera troupe, entertaining the homesick Chinese immigrants of the United States and Canada. When opera work dried up, they settled down in New York's Chinatown and opened a cafe. Whenever an opera troupe came through town, my entire family would go. Thus, my early sense of theater was shaped by the Chinese opera. I didn't see a Western play until I was 17 years old, and it was Julius Caesar. Even at that early age, I was struck by the boundaries expressed and unexpressed that defined my participation in American society. So when I set out to make art, I instinctively made art that would transcend those boundaries. I was lucky enough to get my start in the contemporary theater with Meredith Monk, learning my craft not in a university, but in the presence of a seminal, pioneering contemporary maker. After collaborating with her for many years, I set off on my own. My first independent theater work was titled Lazarus, about a man who returned from the dead but is unable to share the experience with those around him. Like many of my early works, this is not working. I'm going to leave it alone. This drives me crazy. About a man who returns from the dead but is unable to share the experience with those around him. Like many of my early works, it explored the role of the other, the outsider in society, an experience I was all too familiar with as a first-generation immigrant, as a person caught between cultures, and as an artist in a society that does not particularly value artists. Since the first show, I have created almost 100 works, or more properly speaking, interdisciplinary theater works, since I was in the first generation of theater artists who pioneered the use of media in the theater. Today, theater without media is almost unimaginable. As I have gotten older, I have found myself increasingly drawn to history as a source of inspiration. But there is no single history. There are as many histories as there are individuals, peoples, and nations. I am continuously struck by the connections that link us all. As the scientists tell us, all islands connect underwater. As I stand here today, over 300 languages are being spoken or signed across the United States. Before the first European arrived on these fair shores, there were already hundreds of languages spoken here by the people indigenous to North America. Successive waves of immigration that followed only increased the languages spoken here. In the borough of Queens, in my hometown of New York City, 138 languages are spoken. That, I am told, is more than in any other area of the United States. So for a nation of immigrants, as we surely are, it is disheartening that we Americans remain so suspicious and fearful of outsiders coming or even visiting our country. We are building fences around our borders, literally and figuratively, and restricting cultural and intellectual exchange by refusing visas to artists, scientists, and scholars. The people that speak these 300-plus languages are American citizens, or people who wish they could become American citizens, or people who are ambivalent about being or becoming American citizens. A fair number found themselves here through some accident of fate. Others were forced to come here. And we are not alone in this. Around the world, other nations are confronting unexpected waves of immigration that are challenging national identities. For example, I was told by a Belgian colleague that Mohammed is now the most common name for a male child born in Brussels. But will Mohammed ever be considered a Belgian name? Will a baby born in Belgium named Mohammed ever be considered Belgian or even European? So how does this connect to making theater? In the summer of 1992, I taught a 10-day workshop in Amsterdam with students from all over the world. In the evening, we would sit in one of the many charming brown or white bars in Amsterdam and talk about everything from food to politics to sex. One evening, it struck me that I had been hearing all these different languages flying back and forth across the table, and I thought, here is a group of people from different cultures and experiences engaged in an affirmative and collective endeavor, the exploration of artistic expression. I wondered that night whether it was possible to make a theater work using multiple languages, testifying to the history of lives lived and the phenomena of culture itself. So I set to work on what would become the first of a series of oral history documentary theater works entitled Undesirable Elements. My approach wasn't scientific. I asked friends to introduce me to bilingual people, and one person led to another, and so on. In each new work, I interviewed people in a community who come from different cultures. I asked them about where they are from, the history of their cultures, their experiences living wherever we are making the performance. From these interviews, I create a script with input from the participants that they themselves performed. Most of them had never been on a stage before. Since 1992, I have created nearly 50 Undesirable Elements productions around the United States, Asia, and Europe, with people from all over the world. I might add that the term Undesirable Elements is couched in irony. Undesirable Elements celebrates lives, experiences, and worldviews which lie apart from the majority American culture. Only connect, as E.M. Forster famously wrote. By connecting, you will dissipate fear, and fear is the one commodity that there is far too much of in today's world. Through the Undesirable Elements series, I hope to help people see that the other is the same as us, with all the failings and attributes of human beings all over the world. How do we, as a species, overcome the need to dominate and learn instead to cooperate? Let me tell you a story. In the late 19th century, the most precious commodity was not oil, but rubber. It sounds quaint today, but it was crucial as insulation for the new wonder called electricity, which was transforming the world. At that time, the place with the most available rubber was the Congo, and the Congo was in effect a private corporation belonging to King Leopold of Belgium. It is estimated that over 5 million Congolese people died as slaves collecting Leopold's blood rubber. This exploitation of the people of the Congo went on for decades until a lowly shipping clerk named E.D. Morel noticed that riches beyond imagining were returning from Congo to Europe, but that only weapons and domestic supplies were going into the Congo. He concluded correctly that something terrible was going on and decided to act. He risked everything by leaving his job to found one of the first international human rights movements to combat King Leopold. I first learned of this story through Adam Hochschild's book, King Leopold's Ghost, and it inspired me to make a show called Blindness in 2004 with King Leopold, E.D. Morel, and other historical figures as characters. Why was E.D. Morel willing to risk everything for people he would never meet, without promise of financial gain or any other recognition? The answer is compassion. The answer is empathy. The answer is justice. The ability to connect. The true conviction that all human beings are created equal. In 2009, a Congolese man named Cyprien Mahingo came to Kyle Bass, the literary manager at Syracuse Stage, where I had created a previous Undesirable Elements project. Cyprien is a refugee from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He had come to Kyle with a play he'd written based on interviews with members of his community. From Cyprian, Kyle learned that approximately 200 Congolese refugees lived in Syracuse from 12 different ethnic groups, victims and victimizers living in close proximity. Although they had escaped the brutal conflict in the Congo, in Syracuse, tension and mistrust remained, and yet they were attempting to come together, to move past violence, to work hand in hand to build a better future for all members of the Congolese community. Talking with Cyprian, Kyle saw the opportunity for another Undesirable Elements work with the support of Chancellor Nancy Cantor and the Syracuse University arts presenter Carol Brzezowski agreed to commission the project. Kyle and I interviewed 13 Congolese community members. At first, we heard happy stories of peaceful life before the killings began. Then we heard stories of unimaginable violence and violation. We heard stories of boys kidnapped and turned into soldiers. We heard stories of neighbor turning against neighbor. We heard stories of displacement, families separated by war, long, difficult years spent in refugee camps. We heard the awful and ancient refrain of war, women raped, whole families slaughtered. But out of this darkness rose stories of survival and hope. Most inspiringly, we heard stories of forgiveness and hope. Out of these stories, we are creating a work of theater, Cry for Peace, Voices of the Congo. Our main objective for Cry for Peace is to create a theater production that will help bring peace and reconciliation to the Congolese community here in the United States and serve as a model for similar reconciliation projects elsewhere. We also wish to bring to light the complicity of the West and transnational corporations in the smuggling of blood diamonds out of the Congo. Their callow, racist, and profit-driven actions help perpetuate the vicious violence that visits profound suffering upon millions of Congolese people. I might add that over the past 130 years, we in the West have benefited mightily from this plunder, an inconvenient truth which the production intends to make clear. I feel strongly that the story of the Congo is one of the great overlooked tragedies of our times. Over 5 million people have died since 1996 because of the chaos of war and desire for blood minerals. We, as Westerners, are complicit in this tragedy due to our hunger for rare minerals in our ever-present electronic devices. What strikes me most about the Congolese community in Syracuse is their strong desire to overcome ethnic tensions that are destroying their homeland and to reach across boundaries to achieve reconciliation. My hope is that this project, this work of art, can contribute to that process in some small way. Cry for Peace has been in development for more than a year and will premiere at Syracuse Stage in September 2012. 2012 is also the 20th anniversary of the Undesirable Elements series and my 40th anniversary as an artist. I never guessed when I was sitting in that bar in Amsterdam that 20 years later this project would have taken me to such far-reaching places, geographic, psychic, and spiritual. It has changed me, and it continues to inspire me. My lifelong journey negotiating the culture I was born into and the culture I adopted seemed at first a dilemma. I now see it as a gift to me, both as an artist and as a human being. It has taught me that the need for connection, respect, justice, and empathy. There must be a new paradigm of connectedness, of inclusion, of sharing, of belonging, of respect, of responsibility, of sacredness. Because with every passing day in our brave new world, we are losing more and more of our connection to ourselves, to each other, to the past, to our rich histories, and to the earth itself, which nurtures us. Because without this sense of connection, there can be no respect for life on this planet. Thank you.